you never stop learning with film. There's just so many things I want to try, and I'm really, really excited. I mean, I just hope I live long enough to be able to try all these things and all these projects that I want to do.
Welcome to the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. I'm Angela Nicholson, and I'm the founder of SheClicks, which is a community for female photographers. In these podcasts, I talk with women in the photographic industry to hear about their experiences, what drives them, and how they got to where they are now. This episode is with Roman Manfredi, who at 16 began working as a darkroom assistant and used a second-hand camera to photograph friends. Since then, Roman's work, which often focuses on amplifying working-class voices, has been exhibited globally. Their project Fair Play features the women and non-binary development and reserve teams at Clapton Community Football Club. Roman is also one of the 4 winners of the 70-15-40 project, which aims to address the underrepresentation of women, trans and non-binary people in visual storytelling. Hi Roman, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Now, I know when you left school, you started work as a darkroom assistant and you bought a second-hand camera to photograph your friends. But what was it that inspired you to do that?
Because I was working for photographers, and the fact that I could process my own and develop and print my own photos, that made it hugely accessible. So I could print really light. I took pictures of some people in a local mannequin factory, and I could print those quite big in colour for nothing. So it was that, and there was somebody came and did work experience from the US, and we became friends. And she had a Nikon, and that was my aspiration. I mean, I couldn't afford a Nikon, but we used to go out and take pictures together, and I think that was really what did it, really being in that environment.
And what was it that attracted you to the job as a darkroom assistant? Was it just chance that was an available job and you got it, or did you actually specifically look for it?
No, I didn't specifically look for it. My mum handed me the local paper, which was the Islington Gazette, and she just said, look, get a job. And I think I was I'd only just turned really 16, so I was a child looking back on it. And because I really loved art, but I knew that wasn't accessible to me, or especially around that time for a working class woman, from an estate, going to art school was not even on the radar. So I looked for the most creative job I could find in that paper. And then I saw this darkroom assistant. I thought, oh, that sounds a bit different. Because where I grew up in King's Cross at that time, it was all full of factories. And that's where, people tended to work locally. And it was quite local to where I lived. It was a couple of bus stops away. So that sort of fit within everything. But I was also trying to move away from, or trying to move outside of, really not having a lot of opportunities, I would say, or support really to sort of go further in life. So that was the beginning of that, really.
And did they train you up in the art of processing film and producing prints?
Yeah, I hand process colour film. So it was a photography studio. The photographers would work downstairs, and they trained me to it was a huge responsibility. I felt it was like, oh, this really big responsibility, obviously. They trained me to print them as well. So yeah, they were quite large. I mean, it wasn't a snappy snaps, it was quite a high quality print lab, which was upstairs from studios.
Did you have much creative license with the prints, or were you sort of very much directed in how much dodging and burning and things to do?
You sort of learn as you went along, really. But it was your decision how much cyan or blue or red or yellow, you know what I mean, you put in. We were trained, we had the gelatin filters. We'd have 5 cyan. You'd look at your test strip, and then you get your filters and you go, it looks a bit red. And then you looked at it through the 5 cyan, the 10 cyan, 20 cyan, whatever. Yeah, so I learned that. I learned that how negatives worked, how colour worked within that industry. I guess it really helped me in my last project, Weus, because I did work with the printer. I'd go down and we look at the test prints, and my eye is quite acutely trained to that. So I really kind of enjoyed working with colour after 50 odd years or whatever it was. Like, it was a long time. between that and me working with colour film. And
sounds like a brilliant place to learn and get a really good grounding in colour theory and practice.
Yeah.
You continue to shoot with film. Have you shot with digital cameras at all?
I sold that camera and I bought a ticket to San Francisco when I was a teenager. So that changed the course of my life, and I stopped photography altogether. So I didn't pick up the camera again until I wanted to do Weus, and I went to art school in my 40s. So I'm not trained as a photographer. I haven't had any formal training in that respect. And I knew that because I knew the project I wanted to do, and I knew the way to represent my community was photography, really. It was the most accessible way. And so I tried using I bought a digital camera. I just couldn't really connect with this sort of big lump of plastic and this sort of big lens, and, and all the menus were quite overwhelming. And I was struggling, I wasn't really getting the results that were making my heart sing, and that is a really good indication to me when I've got something that I want to pursue. It's interesting because I had 3 friends with Hasselblads film cameras, and one of them had just said, look, I think you really think you need to shoot on film. And they put the Hasselblad in my hand, and another friend was like, oh yeah, I've got one. You can use it for as long as you like. So I started off, and it wasn't an instant connection. I really liked the physicality of it. I loved the way it slotted together. I loved the sound it made. I loved as it clicked together, and there were all these things you couldn't make mistakes. If the dark slide was in, you couldn't take there were all these kind of, it was just such a beautiful object that I pursued it. And then it was around that time, I think before that actually, Ingrid Pollard had come into my life, and we'd become friends, and she was like, yeah, definitely, like, come over, let's shoot on my Hasselblad. And she kind of taught me a little bit about that. So I had this kind of support around that, and everyone was saying they could see it before I could see it, that I'm a film photographer, and that's why it wasn't working on digital.
Do you think there's something about the constraints of film as well? Because, you've got, 10, 12 frames on a roll, whereas digital, there is a temptation to keep shooting until it gets dark, basically.
Oh, yeah, exactly that. And you really are forced to live with the failure of your work. You've only got 12 on a roll. I mean, I shoot even less now. Now I'm shooting like half a roll per person. Whereas when I started, I was shooting 2 or 3 rolls because I just was insecure about whether I'd got it or not. And even then, I learned the other day that Richard Avedon took 17,000 photographs on negatives, and I think about 82 went in the book, and that's a really kind of good reminder that you're not going to be in love with every image, and every now and then there's a sort of an alchemy synchronicity situation that happens, and it's white wall. And yes, so I do like the parameters. I like the simplicity of, you just have this essentially a black box. You have light, you have your person that you're working with, and you have yourself. And so it's really, really pared back, and that works well for me. And plus, I like the element of, no, I can't shoot a 12,000 ISO like I can on a digital camera or any of that crazy stuff. Love learning about how the film responds to light and the different film grains. Now I've gone into a complete rabbit hole with the whole situation. Now that I'm also developing my own film, it's all about all different developers and different development times. And I've found something that not only that you never stop learning with film. There's just so many things I want to try, and I'm really, really excited. I mean, I just hope I live long enough to be able to try all these things and all these projects that I want to do.
I think it's fantastic when you find something like that that really excites you. You can't wait to discover more and more about it. As an aside, do you use a waist level finder or an eye level finder?
At the moment, I'm with the Hasselblad. I'm using the Prism Finder, the eye level Prism Finder, so that everything is the right way up.
Yeah.
But I'm really looking at a different camera now, and I want to start using the waist level finder. There's two that I'm drawn with. I'm drawn to the Mamiya RZ67 because I quite like the focusing dial to not be on the lens. That's really nice. And I'm also looking at like a Rolly or something like that because I quite like the feeling of having the camera close to your body, on your body, and then you're looking down into the waist up. It's a very, very different dynamic with all these different ways of using the camera and how it's going to perform for you. So yeah, I'm really, really excited about trying those things out in the future. And I also use a large format camera as well. I bought that with the award money from this project from 70, 15, 40. I thought, this is it. I've been wanting to do this. And what I realised was I did do a couple with that for this project. I did the shots of the ground, but with the shots, the portraits, I went back to my Hasselblad because it was just awkward. I was out in these football fields in wind, rain, and all sorts of things, and it was just kind of making it a little bit stressful for me and for them. So I just thought, you know what, just go back. You're not ready.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Certainly, I love that as well, and I want to sort of work more with that one as well in the future. So the possibilities are endless with film. It really is just extraordinary, the whole thing.
And have you stuck with entirely traditional processing and printing, or have you processed your films and then do you scan them at all and use a digital process?
Well, Weus I wasn't good enough at that stage to print directly from the negatives. So Weus was shot on film. It was then scanned with a drum scanner, and then we printed it through the chemical process. So it had a digital intervention in that, and that some of them were tweaked a little bit, and my exposures weren't always great. But it was such an important project. I mean, now I'm much more experienced, and I'm definitely getting better. It's completely different printing off a negative as well. With this project, the printer is printing from the negative and it's going in the chemicals, and it's a really it's quite a different look, and it's you're in the presence of something that is alive. I wouldn't say it is more, it's alive for me, whereas the digital process can be flattening and a bit deadening. But that's just what works for me. It has a different aliveness to it. It's just had a lot more love and care put into it.
Yeah. There's also that connection, isn't there, to the history of photography, which is quite appealing, I think. You're doing something in a very similar way. Okay, the chemicals have moved on a bit, the cameras have moved on, but the process is basically the same. That's quite intriguing and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of quite amazing. I mean, I'm even starting to think about my next project and just thinking about using even more sort of historical processes, but in this contemporary context. And I think that's really, really interesting that you can still use these cameras from 1901 if you can find those old ones. And, they're really tricky to see through, to focus and stuff like that. So that is quite extraordinary. Like, all of these cameras are still available, which is brilliant.
Please excuse this interruption. This podcast is sponsored by MPB, the world's largest platform for used photography and videography kit. MPB has transformed the way people buy, sell and trade equipment, making photography more accessible, affordable and sustainable. MPB is proud to partner with SheClicks to help support women photographers and their work. Okay, let's get back to the show. Now, you've mentioned your project Weus a couple of times. That was only last year, wasn't it, that was exhibited, but it seems to have been quite a breakthrough for you.
Yeah, it really has. When you get this sort of support, I mean, I really love the photography community. It's really different to the art community, for example. There just seems to be more opportunities, and it's just a different thing altogether, I guess. And I find it very inclusive, really. And the opportunities are constant for photography, because obviously with social media, how we consume images, I was very aware of that when I embarked on Weus, because, and that was one of the reasons I did it, because when I Googled butch, stud, lesbian, UK, there was nothing there. And now you can Google that and my work will be included along with the stuff that you see from the US. So it was very much, in terms of my community and my identity, was very much led by the US. And it was like, well, what, don't we exist here? And it was also a way of archiving. So that work is now archived in Bishopsgate Institute, and it will be there forever for future generations.
Wow, that is fantastic. And that must feel very rewarding, but also very empowering for you, because you've done something which has kind of put a line in history.
Yeah, and really, to be honest, that's all I thought about. I didn't think about the opportunities that have come since then. So that's like an extraordinary situation that I'm in now. And I'm also won an award to do a project next year, which I'm not allowed to talk about. But again, it's kind of on the back of that project, and mixed with what has become a really deep connection, a deep relationship that I have with photography itself, and the love for film on cameras and the whole process of it, even though it's infuriating, like any marriage, if you like.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. So late, at my age, I feel like, well, this is the beginning. This is another beginning of my career. And in a way, it's really, really interesting that the guy that's printing my work now for this project, I worked with when I was 16, but he was in the black and white department and I was in the colour department. And I kind of found this guy by chance. And it's kind of like this cyclical, this healing in the 70s, like, is a extraordinarily sexist time. I mean, I was groped in the dark rooms. Everything was just like, it was just Benny Hill, it was all normal.
Yeah.
And, with the content of this work as well, it's this kind of, I feel this amazing, it's like opportunities that I couldn't have then are happening now. And it's just an extraordinary sort of situation. And it is all about, I think creativity is a lot about sometimes healing those parts of yourself. That's been my experience of pursuing art. There's just so many kind of layers.
What was it that originally inspired you to start the Weus project?
The need for representation.
So was that just that gap?
I wasn't a photographer before that. That's not what I did. And that's why I just thought, well, someone's got to do it. I'll do it. I think what happens is I just kind of look at what's out there, or I see a space, and then, okay, there's a need for representation in that space, and I see that space, and then I move into that space. And that seems to be something that is quite a core thing with me, like what needs to be said here, and what can I do to facilitate that? I mean, obviously it's my voice as well as their voice. So I think the conversation about identity and class within queer communities is something that I felt could do with putting out there. Especially like queer culture is very academic. It's very Northern European, Northern American led, and it's all about identity politics. And I just was interested in the lived experience because I know what my lived experience is, as particularly was in manual labour, and why did I do manual labour? You know what I mean? And so all of that, I just thought, you know what, I want to hear different accents. I want to hear people I want to hear Geordies and Brummies and Cockneys, and, I want to hear everybody in an art context. So it's a little bit of a declassing, people say decolonising, declassing an art environment, and I hope to do my bit in disrupting that. I mean, I'm not the first person that's done that, but in continuing to do that and bringing more accessibility to people from those environments.
Did you self-fund that project?
No, it was partly Arts Council funding.
That's quite interesting that you were stepping into photography for the first time. You said you weren't a photographer before then, but you had the confidence to apply for funding.
Only because I'd already received a Developing Your Creative Practice grant from there. So that's when I tried the digital stuff out, and I started going around the country, and that sort of helped me look into different things and research and stuff like that. And then I met somebody who helped me think about arts council funding. There's no way I would have. I didn't even know how to do a timeline. I didn't know. I've never done an Excel spreadsheet, so I'm dyslexic as well, and all of this screen stuff drives me up the wall. I met somebody, and this has been my journey of, I've had generosity after generosity, and I actually met somebody. He was a photographer, but he was also a project manager, and he was like, oh yeah, I'll give you an hour a week. I'm not going to charge you. I believe in your project. And he taught me how to get to that. You have to have this one sentence. You have to say your whole project in a sentence. And that's hence the title being, that was the title, which is a stuff from working class background. But you had to say it in one sentence so that they knew exactly what it was in that one sentence. And so I just used that as a title in the end.
That's great advice, I think, because there's so many times I've read someone's project proposal and it's a whole sheet of paper, and at the end of it, I'm still a bit confused about what their actual project is. So being able to condense it down to something so succinct, I think, is a real valuable asset.
Yeah.
Fair play. The project that you're working on for the 17-15-40 exhibition is about players for the Clapton Community Football Club's, the Women and Non-Binary Development and Reserves teams. What led you to them?
Well, the great thing about awards like this is it really forces you to do something. And I knew I wanted to try black and white, and I knew I wanted to use this new camera. And so I was looking for a new project. And it was either going to be community women's football or female security guards. And I thought, right, let's try the community football. So I looked up, I Googled it. What's the closest one? What are the games going on tomorrow? And I see Clapton. So I arrive at Clapton, and I've never been there, and it's not in Clapton, it's in Forest Gate. So I get there, and the first thing I notice is the sound. And there's all these drumming and singing, and I was like, oh my God, yes, this is it. Even before I saw the ground, I was like, yeah, here we go. This is because I love to use sound in my work. And so when I got in, it was like something from the 70s. It was like football used to be when I was a kid. It was real, this community element. And it was very clear at the ground that it was very, very political, right? And, there were banners in support of Palestine. There was anti-racism, anti-homophobe, everything was there. And I was just like, yes, this is it. And then it was a series of synchronicity moments. And I just was standing, and I just turned around to this person next to me and said, actually, I think I really want to do a project with the women's team. And she said, well, funnily enough, one of the coaches from the women's team is a good friend of mine, and she's coming to the game. And then there she was, and we were introduced. We had an email, we met, and straight away we connected. So they were all the indications to me that, okay, this is it. Let's just give this a go. It's been a struggle because I've spent a lot of time with my kit, my tripod, this heavy film camera, traipsing through fields and football fields, trying to find where they're playing and stuff like that. Mostly it's in Hackney Marshes. I mean, I know where I am now, so I can get there quite quickly. But at the beginning, it was tricky, and I really wanted to capture them after a game. So the reason I wanted to capture them after a game is because I felt I just didn't... It was a bit of, like I said before, I saw that space. We have corporate football, we have women's football now, and it's corporate, but they're airbrushed, there's a certain look to them, and I really wanted these photos that were black and white, that had grain, they had a bit of grit on them, that they were sweating, that they were after the game. And I felt after the game they're quite present in their bodies. So that's really, really important in my work. I tend not to photograph people smiling because I feel that's with the smile, you bounce off the smile. But with when you don't have that and you just have the person just present, it kind of lets you into something a bit more, and especially with black and white, because you can bounce off colour as well. And I think so there was that reasoning for what was one of the things I wanted to explore, black and white. So already, you know, you're setting up the camera, and by the time you've done all of that, they've had time to settle into themselves, particularly if you're using large formats. They've had that time to settle into themselves. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I was sort of looking for, which is, it's been a bit challenging because, you know, they're cold, they're tired, they just want to go and get a cup of tea or go to the pub usually. You know what I mean? They don't want to be standing around the cold like this. Oh, hang on a minute while I pull the dark slide out.
Yeah.
I wanted to capture the strength and the power, because partly what they're trained to do by the wonderful coach Ellie in the development team is to take up space as women. And, you know, so they inhabit their bodies in a different way than they might do, some of them, outside of football. And you've got people who they've got their hair all up out of the way just to play the game, and they wouldn't normally look like that. So there's all of these kind of elements which I wanted to capture in that.
And there's a real power and importance of the connection that you have as a team or a community. But when you've been playing a team sport, I think, like you say, after the game, it's elevated. That connection is formed as they go on the pitch, or reconnected as they go on the pitch. And it's absolutely at its peak as they come off, I think, you know, particularly if they've won. But sometimes also if they've lost, they kind of connect and commiserate with each other. But I wanted to ask you about the non-smiling, sometimes deadpan or quite serious-looking expressions. Do you direct them to that, or do you find that's natural? Because I imagine if they've just come off and they've had a fantastic victory, there's a lot more smiling.
I think it really depends on the person, and I think you've got to remember a lot of them are quite young and they're used to putting their image out there in a different way, in a selfie and a smiling and a looking good. And I do say, take a deep breath. I just say, I just want no smiling. That's it. And sometimes they go to the extreme of looking a little bit mean, but then that's what it is. So whatever that means to them, I just say, I ask them not to smile, and I try to get them grounded in their bodies and stuff like that, because, you know, I don't know them very well. They don't know me very well. They're not really sure about how to perform, I guess, for the camera.
What made you apply for the 70-15-40 project?
Somebody messaged me and said, I think you'd be good for this. So I applied. I didn't actually know about it myself.
But what was it about that appealed to you? Was it basically the fact that you could fund a project?
Yeah, it was an opportunity to keep working. Yes, it's nice to have the money to continue to do that, but it was more about the motivation. And I wanted to see what it was like to work with people who were professional, like all of you, and how this show is now coming together. I mean, it's interesting to witness, you know, all the press releases and all the interviews that I'm having to do, and how I don't have to be in charge of all that, which is really, really nice, because I was in Weus, I really did everything mostly myself, or I pushed it all along myself. So it's really nice to have people really doing their jobs well, and I don't have to kind of think about all of that side of it.
Yeah, that's really good. What advice would you give to any women or trans or non-binary people thinking about applying for a bursary or a scheme like the 70-15-40 project?
Just go for it. Go for everything. I mean, that's what I do. If you go for 100 things, you might get a couple. You know, it's just about the ratio. Most of the things I've been successful in has been picture on picture. There's a lot of opportunities. Just seek out the opportunities, basically, and apply for them all. A lot of them are free. But, you know, I've had great experiences with festivals where it's been like €15 or something to apply. And I guess I have a parameter, how much I can spend in a month on that. And sometimes more recently, people have approached me to apply for things. So, you know, it's now getting interesting.
No, I think just go for it is a great message.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a good time to go for 6 from SheClicks. I've got 10 questions from SheClickers, and I would like you to answer 6 questions, please, by picking numbers from 1 to 10. So could I have your first number, please?
1.
What is your creative process for finding or developing a new theme for your work? Does it come organically as you work on an existing project? That question's from Renata.
It does, but it also depends on where I'm at. I think having an experience, I had a wonderful experience in Spain, in Barcelona, where I was showing the work with Revelati Festival. And I just wanted to spend more time in Europe. I was just like, you know what, my background is Italian and I hadn't been to Italy since the beginning of the pandemic. And I was like, right, and I'd had this urge to want to go and do a project in Italy. And I kind of knew roughly what it was, and I just started researching, and it led me to this project, which I've just won an award to do next year. So it's kind of a combination, really, of things, because there's a lot of things, lots of different projects that I feel need my attention. But this one is going to be spending time over there on and off pretty much for next year.
I'm really looking forward to seeing your next project.
So am I. I'm terrified. I'm like, oh my God, because you go through so many different levels. When I heard about it, I was just jumping up and down, and then I was shaking, and then I went into 3 days of shame and fear of like, oh, but as well, like they've invested in somebody my age, and I went through a lot of kind of shame around, and there was a lot of class stuff that came into it, and now I'm a bit intimidated, but I'm always somebody that will push myself, because I don't want to continue at this stage of my career, if you like. I don't want to continue just framing people in a box, in a square, and that's it. You can carry on like that, but actually I want to go a bit deeper. I want to explore a bit more. So I look for opportunities that will allow me to do that. And it's difficult because, you have to then go in that whole failure thing, because you've got this project that's been successful, and I just saw myself as a one-trick pony at that point. I didn't even think about anything. And then the more I've kind of gone on, the more I've like, oh no, obviously there's something here for me to develop further. And I will always push myself to jump off a few cliffs and take some risks with everything that I do. So I did that with Weus. I was like, I've never shot, really hardly shot any film, and then there I was going around the country, and I was like, oh my God. And I went up and down a couple of times because I had all these problems with it being out of focus, with things going wrong. And so you have to be really prepared to deal with all of that, and to just keep going forward with what you've got in your own imperfect way, and be really where you're at. And I am at the beginning of my career.
What you've talked about there really is imposter syndrome. And I think it's important to remember everybody's got it or gets it. And so you might have 6 people in a room all looking at the other people thinking, I'm not as good as them. And they can't all be worse than everybody else. But it's just something inside us that is a real pain in the bum, really. But you just got to fight through.
For me, it's all more of an opportunity for healing and growing and moving beyond that. And, you can stay at home or you can move out of your comfort zone. And I would always much rather move out of my comfort zone than just be sitting here comfortable framing people in a box. I mean, there's power to that. And I think I'm quite formal in my approach, and I enjoy that. But I also feel like there's more there.
Okay. Could I have your second number then, please?
Number 8.
What is your favourite film for your Hasselblad? That is from Liz.
I'm still experimenting. I'm still exploring. I recently fell in love with Delta 400. My favourite colour film, although I've only used 2 different types. I love Portrait 400 for its pastel renditions, the way it renders the colours. It gives it a softness that I really like. I love Delta 400, but I'm shooting on FP4 as well at the moment, and I've just discovered, somebody said that I should try this Fujifilm Acros as well.
Oh yeah, nice.
So I guess mainly I'm shooting on FP4 and Delta 400 right now.
Okay. Thank you. Could I have your third number, please?
3.
Attitudes towards the LGBTQ community seem to have become more accepting. Have you seen a change in the way your work is perceived, and has it been more readily accepted as a result? That question's from Mariange.
I'm only doing the work now, and I do feel that it's a particularly good timing where people are, it's more that they're aware of needing to be inclusive, that they are inclusive more than that. And that perhaps leads them to a more genuine interest. I don't know. I think the young generation at the moment, I don't know what gen, whatever that is, are really like, queer is no big deal. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't say that actually lightly, because people are still being murdered for being queer. I guess I'm just talking within my own experience. But yeah, I do feel there's a little bit more, but I'm still kind of mostly, put into either a women or non-binary award or a queer project. Like a lot of, it's not all of it. Some of it is like, Revelity was analog photography, but I'm not sure. And I'm only recently being recognised in Britain, actually. Like, Weus went down really well in Europe. And I wasn't sure, because it's not just the queer stuff with my work, it's class and race attached to that. And because it's in Britain, I'm not sure if that's a bit too close to the bone to our, deeply ingrained elitist photography community. I mean, I really don't know. It's all very, very new to me. So I have nothing to really compare it to like I was doing it before. But I think, yeah, there's just a kind of a general wave of consciousness that I think that people want to kind of include people like me.
Good. Okay. Could I have your fourth number, please?
2.
How do you meet your subjects, and what's their reaction when you explain your project? And a few people ask that one.
Well, Weus was an intergenerational project, and I found that with a lot of the older people, they were a bit more resistant to it, and I had to sort of prize them out a little bit. Whereas the younger ones were like, oh, cool, yeah. That was much more, when I explained what it was about, and I always, before we do the photos, I always spend time with them. I interview them for at least an hour. I share things about myself that are quite personal, about who I am as a person and stuff like that. And then I give them the opportunity to work with me or not work with me. But most people say yes. And I've found some people on Instagram, people that follow me or I follow them. If I follow the butch or stud hashtag, you follow hashtags and you find people that way. I've found people in the street. That's a harder one. And through word of mouth. I didn't want to put an open call out for it because I wanted absolutely equal representation. I only had 10 slots for older white butches and 10 slots for older black butches or studs, and because there were 40. So I really wanted that equality, I guess, cultural diversity. I wanted the intergeneration. I wanted the different ages. So I could have done it, lots more people, probably like the people that I know, that, the older. And, so that's the way I went about it. I just went about, right, who do I want? And I've got this many. So I very much, and not everybody's photogenic, and I think that's a difficult thing because you do have to make decisions. And while I would just go, oh yeah, I'll just include everybody, that would not have worked in this context. And I'm having to do the same thing with Fair Play, because even though they're predominantly white, I've got less of them, and I've got a sort of a more, there's a couple of trans women in there as well, and I just kind of really want that mix. Maybe it's not truly representational of the teams as they really are, but I feel like if I just pull that out, then that representation's, important to me. Yeah, that's the way that I go about that.
I think that's a really good point about the open call, because it's a bit like if you put a notice in a shop window, you're only going to get people applying who walk past that shop window. So it's probably people who live in that street. And so you're limiting yourself. But if you search around, you open up the possibilities to people. Okay, can I have your fifth number?
9.
Did you always do your interviews for Weus before or after shooting the photos, or did it vary? And do you think it made a difference to the results? That question's from Liz.
Always before, and I think it did make a difference. And then I keep in contact with some of them, and they're on, I think this is the thing with Instagram. They like my posts, I like their post. I just, some of them no, but some of them we've kind of kept in contact, and that's sort of important to me, that they're participants, and I don't want them to feel. I want them to feel that. I always ask them what they get out of it. Why do they want to be involved? So that there's an ownership as well on their part, that they're participating, and they're getting something out of it as well. That's a very, very important conversation.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's very significant. Okay, so your last number then, please.
10.
In terms of the intergenerational aspect of Weus, what did you feel were the most significant similarities and differences between the different generations?
Oh,
You said that some of the older people were more reticent.
well, yeah, but we had a very different experience. I think it's the social media was probably the main thing, and the confidence the younger ones have and what's available to them. I think some of them, there was one in particular that was really, when she found out the stories of some of the older ones, was like, wow, I'm so honoured to be part of this, and it was that sharing of stories, because what happens is with us older ones, we get out of touch quite quickly, don't we, with what's going on in the younger ones. When I was young, there was one bar, and so you met all different generations. Do you see what I mean? And that's not really like, I wouldn't go into that situation now because they're all going to be young. Do you know what I mean? And so I think the main thing is that what I really wanted to do is provide access to each other's experiences intergenerationally, and provide something for the younger ones to kind of ground themselves in our history. Do you know what I mean? And particularly because, there still is, I guess, the black scene and the white scene. And when we talk about LGBT, we're really talking about the white scene. And I really knew that, like when I was young, I lived in Brixton and in the 80s, and it was very clear there was the black women's conferences and movements, and there was class was talked about, racism was talked. It was quite an intense time, and the black women had their own parties and their own things that they did, and I really, really wanted to draw attention to that. I really wanted those stories. So we had a whole event which was called How I Survived the 80s, which came from an interview with one of the participants, and that how those parties and those fundraisers were how they survived the 80s. And just to hear about all of that, I thought was quite valuable for younger generations to come, because it's lesser known, I guess.
Yeah, and also all teenagers and younger people, they tend to think that they're experiencing something for the first time, but actually there might be a few things that are different, but there's a lot of things that older people have tackled as well. And so to have that conversation and to make it realise that this woman who might look exactly like your grandma had very similar experiences when she was 16 as you're having right now.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. But, I think our experiences I think the danger aspect of it in Britain has possibly lessened. I'm not really out there like I was, but I certainly, and part of that's aging for me, I'm more confident. But you used to have to be careful where you held hands in public, because your life was actually in danger, or you felt, you were on edge. And I remember sort of going out in a suit and feeling really vulnerable, and just sort of like, I took a men's suit, obviously. And that wasn't even that long ago, to be honest, that I was getting thrown out of the men's changing room and stuff like that. It was a lot of stuff that you internalise. You go through your life with this kind of internalised stuff in the best way you can. And I feel that a lot of the young people don't have that as much. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That hopefully we didn't go through all that for nothing.
Amen to that. Well, thank you, Roman, for joining me today on the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear from you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, Ange.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thanks for listening to this episode of the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks to everybody who sent in a question. You'll find links to Roman's website and social media channels in the show notes. I'll be back with another episode soon, so please subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform and tell all your friends and followers about it. You'll also find SheClicks on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube if you search for SheClicksNet. So until next time, enjoy your photography.